Okay, so in this video we're going to do a quick introduction to the components of the money market, the money supply curve and the money demand curve, and then a quick practice problem to show us how these components interact in the determination of the nominal interest rate. The first and most important thing to recognize about our money market is that it is dealing with the nominal interest rate as opposed to our loanable funds model, because this market is not about lending money, but rather about holding cash. In fact, sometimes the money market curve is referred to as the liquidity preference model, which comes into play when we get back to our money demand curve in a moment. But liquidity is the desire of individuals to hold cash or to have cash. So this is the liquidity preference model. How badly do we want to hold cash, and how does that affect our interactions with this market? So let's start with the money supply. The money supply curve, we immediately notice, is vertical, which means it is completely inelastic or perfectly inelastic. And perfectly inelastic, of course, means that there is no relationship with this curve between the nominal interest rate and the quantity of money in the market. So the quantity of money supplied in this market stays the same even as the interest rate increases or decreases. And there's one very simple but very important reason for this, and that is that the money supply is controlled by the central bank of a country. In the United States, the central bank being the Federal Reserve. As a quick review, you can go back and look at the specific tools the Fed has or any central bank has and how they use them. But for here, we can say that this is controlled through the buying and selling of bonds, through a control of the reserve ratio in banks, and in the United States through what is called the discount window, the discount rate at which banks borrow from the Fed. So because this is controlled by the central bank, the money supply is set at a given level. Here we can simply call this Q1, and it will not move in any of our examples unless the central bank acts through the use of monetary policy in some way. The money demand curve, we notice, looks more like a standard demand curve, and that is that it is downward sloping, and therefore we see an inverse relationship between the interest rate and the quantity of money demanded. What this really means is that at a low interest rate, say something like 1%, the quantity of money demanded will be relatively high. But if we increase the interest rate to a higher rate, say 10%, then the quantity of money demanded in this market will be significantly lower. There is one huge reason for this, and this goes back to the idea of liquidity preference, and that is the idea that people prefer to hold their money as cash. The primary reason for that is an idea known as transaction demand, and that is the idea that we need money in order to complete transactions. We need money to buy things and to engage in trade in the economy at any given time. So when the interest rate is low, we can hold, or we will hold, a lot of money because there's virtually no cost to holding the money as cash in our pocket. However, as the interest rate rises, the opportunity cost of holding a dollar goes up. The opportunity cost of holding a dollar is the interest rate. Any dollar that I hold on my person, I cannot earn interest on. So at this 10% rate, every time I hold a dollar in my wallet, I'm unable to earn that 10% rate. And that leads me to want to hold less money than when that interest rate is lower, and therefore the cost of holding that dollar is lower. Movements or shifts of this curve are explained primarily by transaction demand, and the shifts have to do with changes to the economy or changes to our interaction with money that would change our transaction demand. Two of them come primarily from the AD model. One of them is price level. And if price level goes up, then money demand will increase or shift to the right. And that is because when prices go up, say a soda goes from being $1 to $1.25 in a vending machine, then in order to make the same purchases, I need to hold more cash on my person. The other that comes from the same place, the ADAS model, is changes to real GDP. If real GDP rises, real GDP, remember, represents the total amount of spending happening in the economy. So if more people are spending or there is more spending happening, then we can say that throughout the economy there is an increase in the demand for dollars to make that spending possible. Again, return this to the idea of transaction demand. The third idea that can change, or third change that can affect our money demand market and our money demand curve, would be changes to technology. The idea here, something like ATMs, debit cards, or credit cards. And for the most part, though not 100% of the time, changes to technology tend to decrease money demand. The ability to hold money in card form means that we have no purpose for holding it in cash, and it makes it more possible for us, or makes us more willing to put that money in the bank regardless of these potentially lower interest rates. So let's transition this and do a pair of quick practice problems just so that you can put this to work and see how these models actually interact, or how these curves interact in this model. If you want to take a moment, pause the video right now, and then you can pick it up and see what we have as our solutions in a moment. Okay, so in our first example here, we have how would an increase in price level affect the demand for money and nominal interest rates. This one pretty much gives it away. We just spoke about it right before we came down to these practice problems. Increases in price level affect money demand and therefore increase our money demand, which creates a rightward shift of the money demand curve. A rightward shift of our money demand curve will move us up the money supply curve from RE to R2. So an increase in price level will increase money demand, and the increase in money demand will lead to an increase in the nominal interest rate in our money market. If we want to take this one step further, where we know this is going to go next, as the nominal interest rate increases, consumer and investment spending will decrease, which will decrease aggregate demand. In our second example over here, how would a decrease in the Federal Reserve's discount rate affect the supply of money and nominal interest rates? Well, the first thing we have to remember is that the discount rate is the rate that the Fed lends to banks at. So if we decrease the discount rate, then we will in fact increase the money supply by encouraging banks to lend money. And an increase in the money supply represents a rightward shift. So we can come up to our money supply curve, shift the money supply curve to the right, and that's 2, and watch as we move from our original interest rate at RE down to our new interest rate at R2. The increase in the money supply here will decrease the nominal interest rate. And this returns us again to the purpose of monetary policy and the Fed or any central bank. By decreasing the nominal interest rate, the Fed can increase consumer and investment spending and therefore increase aggregate demand. In other words, this policy represents an expansionary policy by this Fed designed to increase aggregate demand and shift the aggregate demand curve to the right and increase real GDP. Hopefully this has been helpful. Practice these, take a look back at your own notes and graph, and be ready to use them.